Franchi Talks Japanese Art. I'm Franchi and I'm back with a new video. Now, if you know me at all, you know that I love all Japanese art, but there are three things that are my favorite. The first one, my main interest, is how art was used and is used to portray nations, including Japan, of course. The second one is craftsmanship. So beautiful objects made by craftsmen, anonymous workers. And the third one is the role that plants and flowers play in a Japanese aesthetic. So I found a way to make a video today that includes all of these three topics. So we're going to talk about the Japan-British exhibition, which took place in London in 1910. We're going to talk about the two gardens that the Japanese decided to build in this occasion, Japanese-style gardens, of course. And finally, we're going to look at one object, a great object of Japanese craftsmanship, which was also featured in these gardens, and it is a wooden gate known as Chokushimon. So if this sounds interesting to you, make sure to stick around and let's jump right in. So let's go on a bit of a journey. The place is London, specifically an area in West London known as Shepherd's Bush, and the year is 1910. In this year, an exhibition, a trade fair is organized, which is known as the Japan-British exhibition. And in this case, the two nations of Britain and Japan have the opportunity to showcase their productions and to promote trade relations between the two countries. Looking at the historical context, these fairs in this time period were not rare. In fact, already since as early as the 13th century, small fairs were organized for countries to showcase their goods and technologies. But the first great exhibition, which had a more global approach, took place also in England, in London, in 1851, and it's known as the Great Exhibition. You probably heard about it. And this started a whole series of international fairs or world fairs. And these fairs took up very important roles because they were a way for countries to show their productions, but also to show their new technologies, and in a way to assert their power on the global scale. And we can even say that these fairs became a kind of obligatory task for countries that had achieved a world power status to hold them and to be present at them, as well as for countries that were trying to achieve this status. By the year 1910, Japan had already participated in several world fairs, and we can note that 1910 is towards the end of the Meiji period, so the process of modernization in the Japanese archipelago is in full swing. And taking part in this Japan-British exhibition, though, is kind of new because it is for the first time Japan is not one country exhibiting amongst, let's say, another 40 nations, but it's in the full center stage because only two nations are exhibiting, Britain and Japan. The Japanese government understood the importance of this moment, of this fair, and even created a whole committee back in Japan made of high-ranking officials and scientists to decide what to display at this exhibition. What the Japanese leadership did understand was that these kind of fairs were also a way for organizers or participants of the fairs to give a message to a wider audience, to be able to display ideas and convey messages. And so in this case we can see from what they decided to exhibit that Japan was portraying itself and giving the message of a nation worthy of being a British ally, to be seen as an equal by Britain, and also to have an equal footing when it came to business and trade relations. The reason why this has been theorized by scholars and historians is because in this case, for the first time at a fair, Japan decided to not only display its products, but instead it decided to give a general overview of Japan as a country, explaining the nation's condition from centuries before up to the present, showcasing their history, but also their arts, crafts, architecture, this education system, the societal role in the country. So giving a wide overview of Japan. Something especially interesting of what the Japanese decided to display at this exhibition is the fact that they chose to build gardens, of course Japanese style gardens. And these gardens, they were not there merely as a decorative surrounding, but they took a central role in the exhibition. In fact, it was decided to build two gardens, which were named the Garden of Peace and the Garden of the Floating Island. And two men were put in charge of designing the gardens and overviewing their construction. They were Keijiro Ozawa and Kinchichiro Honda. Now, these two men were not gardeners per se. They were a writer and a painter, both of whom had collections of historic materials regarding gardens and had also written books about Japanese gardening. However, let's say they were more garden scholars or specialists on paper, but they were not gardeners in the meaning they had no practical experience when it came to constructing a garden. So it's a very interesting fact, the fact that they were chosen as the people who were meant to design the gardens. On the practical side of things, the gardener Hanosuke Ozawa was put in charge of actually constructing the gardens with three other Japanese gardeners as helper, and also British contracted people that were meant to do the work together with the master gardener. Now, we said that the two men that were put in charge of designing the gardens had a kind of scholarly background, and in fact they had a scholarly approach when it came to designing the gardens for the London exhibition, because since the 19th century in Japan there had been a kind of scholarly approach to the understanding of gardens, which was also a kind of mannerist approach, which means that gardens were divided into styles, and when it came to books, each style was described with their characteristics and so on. So two main types of gardens had been defined, and one was the flat garden, Hiraniwa, and the hillock garden, Tsukiyama Senzui. And the designers of the two London gardens did take this approach when designing the gardens. So they wanted them to showcase these two styles. The garden named the Garden of Peace was to represent the hillock style. So it had a mix of groundwork and water, and at the back of it, two big panels with a landscape were placed. These were painted on purpose to give the impression that the garden was in a natural environment. And the garden was, we can say that it was packed, because it featured a small Shinto shrine, a gate, a pagoda, bridges, lanterns, and so on and so forth. And what is interesting to note is that documents at the time state that all these elements were added so that British visitors could recognize this garden as veritably Japanese. So it was not so much about what the Japanese would place in a garden and would recognize as a Japanese garden, but it was about what the British eyes would understand and recognize as a Japanese garden. So to put these gardens into perspective, we can mention that they actually took up 11 acres. if that means nothing to you, like it did for me, I can tell you that that is about 44,515 square meters. So they were very big. And constructing them was truly a feat. They would have been hard to build already if it was Japan's own country, like it would have been effort and work. But in this case, Japan was building them abroad. So it means that we have to take into consideration that at the time, a trip from London to Japan took about 2 months by ship. So everything had to be organized well in advance to be ready for the opening of the exhibition. For the Japanese organizers, it really mattered to give a sense of authenticity. So everything that they featured in the gardens was sent from Japan. In this were including trees, bushes, flowers, stones, bridges, various architectural elements. The architectural elements, they were mostly models of structures already present in Japan or in the style of structures present in Japan, and they were actually built in Japan, shown to officials to get approval to show them in London, then they were dismantled, shipped to London, and there they were reconstructed. So it gives you an idea of the amount of time, effort, and work which was put into these gardens by a number of artists, designers, and craftsmen. One of these garden elements, which was featured in the Garden of Peace, can still be seen today, and it's placed in Kew Gardens in London, and it's this beautiful wooden gate known as Chokushimon, the Imperial Messenger's Gate. This gate is a copy of a gate which is actually found in the temple of Nishi Hoganji in Kyoto. This gate in Kyoto is known as Karamon, and it's incredibly beautiful. It was built towards the end of the 16th century for Toyotomi Hideyoshi to be placed at his Fushimi castle. And then in 1632, after the dismantling of the castle, the gate was taken to the temple Nishi Hoganji, and it was placed there for a visit by Tokugawa Iemitsu. And it's still there, and it's actually recognized as a national treasure. So we note its incredibly important status and role in Japanese art. What we have to note about the Chokushimon is that it was 4/5 the scale of the gate in the Nishi Hoganji in Kyoto. This was a big deal because up until now, every scale model that Japan had displayed at fairs was about 1/20th the scale. So that puts it in a whole new level of scale model. So let's have a look at both structures. As we can see, there are four-legged structures with a gate, a door in the middle. In fact, it's a gate. It was meant for people to go through. And the main notable feature of this gate is the roof. In fact, we can see that the roof was constructed featuring a karahafu. This is a kind of gable which is characteristics of Japanese architecture. And what we can see is that there is basically a gable which has an undulating curve at the top. This karahafu is typical, for example, of the architecture of Buddhist temples, Shinto shrines. It was developed from the Heian period onwards, and with time it became a symbol of authority. And from the Zuchi Momoyama period, it became a constant feature found in the mansions of warlords such as daimyo. The Karamon in itself as well, this gate as well, was a feature of these daimyo's mansions because, for example, it was reserved for the entrance, for the arrival of the shogun at his warlord's place, or in the case of the residence of the shogun, it was reserved for the emperor. What's more, the roof is built following the Irimoya style. Now, defining this is a little bit complicated, sounds a bit technical, but I will describe it while making sure to show it in the pictures so you can get an idea of what I'm saying. Basically, in the Irimoya style, we find a hip roof which slopes down on all four sides, but then on two of the opposing sides it's integrated with a gable. In the case of the Chokushimon, the gable is beautifully decorated with a crane. The gate in Kyoto is known also as the Higurashi Namon, which translates as the all-day gate. This is because it's entirely covered with beautiful quality carvings. These feature mythical animals, creatures, flowers, and, and so on. And so it is said that one person could spend all day looking at these carvings, completely losing track of time. And the 1910 gate as well, the one now in London, also is covered with beautiful quality carvings. These were the product of a Wada Genyemon, a craftsman who is said to have been able to complete all these carvings in only 45 days, which was also a great feat. We can see the beautiful carvings. They represent Polonia flowers, mythical creatures such as dragons and shishi. The only difference between the two gates is that the one in Kyoto is significantly more ornate and colorful than the simple wooden one found in Kew Gardens. But in general, looking at the Chokushimon, we have to admire what kind of feat of craftsmanship it was to have it prepared in Japan, to have been able to disassemble it, ship it, and reconstruct it in time for the fair. All of these elements add even more challenges to what is already an incredible work. But it's also important to look at the Chokushimon back in the context that we have described at the beginning of the video. So we mentioned that the 1910 exhibition was understood by the Japanese as a way to portray their nation and convey a message to the British public. When I was doing the research for this video, I found a very good book by Ayako Hotta Lister, and it's called The Japan-British Exhibition of 1910, The Gateway to the Island Empire of the East. And I really found interesting how the word gateway was put in the title of the book. The author says that it's a reference to the Chokushimon, and so it gave me the idea that we could see the Chokushimon itself as a gateway. Of course, it is physically a gateway for people to walk through, but it's also ideally a gateway because it would act as a way for the Japanese and the British to know each other or portray what they wanted to be known about each other, to create a path for the Japanese to be understood as equal, to be able to trade with the rest of the world and find their place in this new world, a global order which they had been kind of thrown into at the end of the 19th century. So with this idea, I would like to conclude the video. I hope you found it interesting. It was a cool thing for me to research. I am really always interested in the world fairs and ideas of nationalism and this early 20th century. So I had a lot of fun and I hope that you also enjoyed it. If you liked it, don't forget to click like. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to write them in the comment section. And of course, if you want to see more videos, you can choose to subscribe to the channel. Of course, there's more videos coming. And if you want, feel free to support this channel. You can find the links to my Patreon and to my Ko-Fi in the description box, and every little bit helps in keeping the channel active, dedicating more time to the videos because they take a huge amount of time. So I hope to see you again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye!